So I just finished a pathophysiology class at the George Washington University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and I was heading home through the worst blizzards I have ever seen in the city. The snow was unrelenting and the traffic was moving at a snail's pace. Temps were below freezing and visibility was a few hundred feet. My route took me across the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge on the way to Arlington. It was January 13th, 1982, and a little after 4 p.m. as traffic came to a standstill on the bridge. Unbeknownst to me, a major air disaster was unfolding just a few hundred yards away. It was one of the coldest days in Washington, D.C.'s history. Temperatures hovered around 24 degrees Fahrenheit. The city was paralyzed by a blizzard, government offices shuttered, streets buried in snow. But inside National Airport, Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737 bound for Fort Lauderdale, prepared to take off. On board were Captain Larry Wheaton, 34-year-old and former military pilot, relatively new to the 737. First Officer Roger Petit, 31, an Air Florida pilot and former Air Force pilot also. 74 passengers and 5 crew, many heading home after holidays, others escaping the storm. As snow blanketed the wings, the aircraft was de-iced briefly, but delays on the tarmac meant ice had to reaccumulate. The pilots were growing impatient, the airport was chaotic, and ATC was overwhelmed. Captain Wheaton finally gave up and said, "Let's push back." First Officer Petit, "Roger that," was his reply. They made a fateful decision then. Instead of returning for a second de-icing, they chose to follow another jet's exhaust, hoping it would melt residual ice from their wings. But it didn't. As they lined up for takeoff, another red flag went unnoticed. Engine readings were abnormal. The plane was not producing full thrust. But the readings were misinterpreted, and neither pilot verbally referenced the engine anti-ice system, which was also left off. At 4:01 p.m., Flight 90 accelerated down the runway 36. The nose lifted, but something was wrong. The plane climbed sluggishly, wings buffeted. And the cockpit voice reporter, First Officer Petit, forward, easy, we only got 80. Captain Wheaton replied, "Stalling, we're following." First Officer Petit, "I can't hold it." 20 seconds after liftoff, the aircraft struck the 14th Street Bridge, clipping vehicles and careening into the icy Potomac River. The crash killed 74 of the 79 people on board and 4 people on the bridge. Only 5 passengers survived, clinging to wreckage in the freezing water. Helicopters from the U.S. Park Police rescued them in a desperate, harrowing scene broadcast on live TV. One passenger, Arland D. Williams Jr., repeatedly passed the rescue line to others before succumbing to the cold and drowning. His sacrifice earned him a posthumous Coast Guard Medal of Heroism. The NTSB investigation revealed a cascade of human errors. The anti-ice system was not activated, allowing ice to form on engine inlets, reducing thrust. The wing de-icing was ineffective, and takeoff occurred with contaminated wings. The captain ignored critical cues from the co-pilot about abnormal engine performance. The crew had limited experience flying in snow and ice conditions. The pilots attempted to use another jet's exhaust to melt ice, an unproven and dangerous move. The root cause? Poor judgment, cockpit miscommunication, and inadequate winter procedures. The crash of Air Florida 90 led to sweeping reforms in airline training. Emphasis on crew resource management, CRM, ensuring that first officers speak up and captains listen. Strict enforcement of winter de-icing protocols and engine anti-ice use, improved cockpit monitoring and cross-checking. A cultural shift from get their itis to safety first always. The name Air Florida would never recover. The airplane folded in 1984. Today, near the Potomac River, a plaque remembers those lost, among them heroes like Arland Williams, and those who died not from mechanical failure, but from a chain of preventable human errors. Flight 90 stands as a haunting lesson in aviation. In the skies, shortcuts are deadly, and in the cold, there is no margin for neglect. In medical school, we are taught that the surgeon is also the king of the OR, and that his is the last word. In my own experience, having built my own clinic and employed 19 individuals that I worked with on a daily basis, I can't tell you how many times my crew has saved my bacon. For example, a long-standing patient of ours, who we had operated on multiple times over the previous 20 years, came recently for an evaluation for additional surgery. But things changed during 20 years, especially the health history. A critical item was missed in her evaluation by myself. However, before the patient went to the operating room, the error was picked up by the circulating nurse. She identified the patient as having congestive heart failure. This is an extremely high-risk situation for anesthesia complications. I had made it a point to hire extremely well-trained nurses with a ton of experience both in the ICU and the operating room. It has cost a little bit more to hire such skilled individuals, but has certainly paid off in safety over the long run. It's always better to hire individuals that know more than you do, and then listen to what they have to say. In the early days of flight, pilots relied on memory. Switches, valves, trims, flaps, recalled and performed in sequence like a ritual. Because back then, flying was still new and most aircraft were very simple. Then one day in 1935, the aircraft got ahead of the pilot. It's a famous story. The U.S. Army Air Corps was testing the Boeing Model 299, a prototype bomber that would become the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress. It was state-of-the-art, fast, long-range, heavily armed. But as the bomber lifted off for a demonstration flight in front of military brass, it stalled, crashed, and burned. The pilot, Major Ployer Hill, and 2 others died. The plane wasn't flawed. The pilot simply forgot a step in a plane that had too many steps to remember. The B-17 was nicknamed Too Much Airplane for one man to fly. So instead of grounding the program, a group of test pilots came up with a revolutionary solution, a simple checklist, and it worked. The B-17 then went on to fly 1.5 million hours in World War II. The checklist became standard, first in bombers, then all military aircraft. As jetliners like the 707 and DC-8 soared into service, checklists grew alongside them. Airlines standardized normal, abnormal, and emergency checklists built into manuals and cockpit procedures. Pilots were trained not just to fly the plane, but to work the list. Check, confirm, respond. The cockpit became a team environment. Even with checklists, forgetting them can be fatal. For example, Northwest Flight 255 in Detroit, 1987. The crew missed a standard checklist item. The flaps and slats were never extended. The plane never made it off the runway. 154 people died. A simple checklist item missed because of rushing. After that, airlines doubled down. Checklist discipline became sacred. Today, in a Boeing 787 or Airbus A350, checklists are digital, integrated into cockpit displays. Auto-sensed conditions bring up the correct list. Pilots follow flow patterns, then confirm with the checklist. Electronic checklists guide crews step by step through smoke, fire, engine failure, even medical emergencies. But even in small aircraft, laminated paper checklists remain the standard. A checklist is more than a formality. It's a safety net, a memory aid, a contract between pilot and aircraft that nothing will be left to chance. From the ashes of Wright Field to the skies above the world, checklists became the quiet heroes of aviation. Checklists don't fly the airplane, but they help keep them in the air. So I want to talk about a mistake so preventable, so profound, it would spark a national outcry and expose the danger of skipping one simple tool, the checklist, in the operating room. This is about Rhode Island Hospital, the largest in the state and a respected teaching institution. However, in August 2007, a patient was scheduled for a craniotomy to treat a blood clot on the right side of the brain. The surgery was urgent, but not emergent. There was time to plan, there was time to pause, but no pause was taken. The patient was anesthetized and draped. Then the attending neurosurgeon, a respected veteran in the field, picked up the scalpel and began the incision on the left side of the patient's skull. It wasn't after the dura, the membrane around the brain, was opened that someone realized, wait a minute, we were operating on the wrong side. By then it was too late. The damage had been done. Unfortunately, the patient died several weeks later, not from the original injury, but from complications relating to the incorrect surgery. The Rhode Island Department of Health launched an immediate investigation. What they found was shocking. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the third wrong site brain surgery at the same hospital in less than a year. How could this happen? In all three cases, the causes pointed to checklist breakdowns and systematic failures. No surgical timeout was taken. The team failed to pause and verbally confirm the surgical site despite national guidelines requiring it. No marking on the correct side. The correct side of the skull was not marked preoperatively by the attending surgeon as protocol demands. There was a breakdown in communication. Residents, nurses, and techs either assumed the site or deferred to senior authority without speaking up. There was a failure to engage the full team. No team-wide confirmation, no double check, no verification. In aviation, this would be like taking off without verifying the flaps, fuel, or runway. In surgery, it cost a patient their life. At its core, the tragedy at Rhode Island Hospital wasn't about bad people. It was about a bad system. No one felt empowered to speak up. There was not a failure of skill, it was a failure of discipline, culture, and teamwork. After national outrage and media coverage, the hospital faced serious consequences. It was fined $50,000 by the state, it had to submit to mandatory safety monitoring, and it launched a hospital-wide overhaul of surgical procedures. The Joint Commission pushed for stricter compliance with the Universal Protocol, which includes pre-procedure verification, site marking by the surgeon, mandatory timeout with the full team, and it was a turning point in American surgical safety. Today, surgical checklists are standard in our clinic, often modeled after aviation. They aren't bureaucratic boxes to tick, they are life-saving tools. A missed checklist item can cost a life. In complex systems, mistakes aren't always a result of incompetence, sometimes they're just the result of silence. Our clinic uses the mantra, checklists save lives, use them, speak up, slow down. In aviation, every takeoff includes a standardized briefing. A challenge response checklist is mandatory. Pilots confirm aloud. Flap set, trim set, anti-ice on. And if something looks wrong, even the youngest first officer is empowered and expected to say something. In surgery, the stakes are just as high, but back in 2007, many ORs lacked that same safety culture. In the sky or in the OR, discipline saves lives. Check the list, challenge assumptions, communicate. Just one question matters. What can we learn so it never happens again? In the world of flight, the NTSB investigates. In the military, they debrief after every single mission. Two different worlds, same powerful idea. Own your mistakes, study the failure, improve the system. And that approach, it doesn't just apply to jets and war zones. It works in your everyday life as well. When a plane crashes in the US, the NTSB arrives within hours, not to punish, not to sue, but to understand. Their job is to recover the black boxes, interview crew and ATC, reconstruct every minute leading up to the crash. They don't guess, they analyze, test, and dig deep. Sometimes the final report takes years. Why? Because aviation doesn't evolve by being lucky. In the military, especially elite units like Navy SEALs or fighter squadrons, debriefs happen after every single mission, even if the mission was a success. They ask, what did we do well? What did we miss? What will we do differently next time? And here's the key, rank doesn't matter in a debrief. A junior lieutenant can call out a colonel. Why? Because ego kills. Whether it's a jetliner or a military mission, the goal isn't to blame the person, it's to improve the process. That's the power of psychological safety. When teams feel safe being honest about fear of retribution. Compare that to most jobs. A mistake gets hidden. Failure gets covered up. People get defensive, not curious. Now here's the part most people miss. You don't have to be a pilot or a soldier to use these tools. You can run your own personal NTSB. You can host your own mission debriefs. After a tough conversation, what did I say that worked? What shut them down? After a failed project at work, what part of the plan didn't hold? Did I check my assumptions? After a family argument, did I listen or did I react? That's how pros learn. That's how teams grow. That's how systems evolve. The NTSB doesn't yell at pilots. The military doesn't scream in debriefs. They get honest, they analyze, and they build a better future from the broken parts. So next time you fail, don't flinch, but debrief. You might just find the crash is the start of something better. Debrief, own it, learn, fly better. Now let's add a third arena where lives are on the line also, and that's in the operating room. In hospitals, there's a tradition called the Morbidity and Mortality Conference, or M&M Conference. It's the healthcare version of the NTSB crash investigation or military debrief. Every week, surgeons, physicians, and residents come together to analyze bad outcomes. A patient died unexpectedly. A surgery had complications. A diagnosis was missed. These sessions aren't about punishment. They're about asking why and how to make sure it never happens again. Like the military and aviation, the focus is on systems, not just individuals. There's no rank in the OR. A medical student can ask a chief of surgery, why did we do it that way? Everyone is expected to reflect, report, and improve. The NTSB investigates crashes. The military debriefs every mission. Hospitals hold M&M to learn from medical errors. Different uniforms, different tools, same mindset. Debrief, discuss, and then improve. Because of high-stakes environments, failure isn't an option. But when it happens, it's a chance to upgrade the system. Now imagine if we lived in the same way. No shame in admitting a mistake. No ego blocking honest feedback. Just a commitment to growth. That's not just a professional culture, that's a life philosophy. From the cockpit to the ER to the battlefield, debriefing saves lives. Use it everywhere. So now I want to talk about the day an A380 blew apart and why it didn't crash. What no one knew, within minutes of takeoff, one of the world's most advanced aircraft would suffer a catastrophic engine explosion, and yet no one died. Why? Captain Richard Duquesne had over 35 years of flying experience. In the cockpit, also with him, was a first officer, a second officer, a check captain, and a supervising check captain. That's 5 experienced pilots in one cockpit, in one of the most advanced aircraft in the sky. 4 minutes after takeoff, at 7,000 feet, there was a huge explosion. One engine destroyed, 21 system failures, over 100 ECAM messages, the Airbus warning system, and in the chaos, the crew does the unthinkable. They stay absolutely calm. The captain had drilled for failures. Not this many, not to this scale, but he didn't panic. He didn't guess. The first officer managed the engine status. The check captain advised on emergency procedures. The second officer was assigned to work with flight attendants to secure the cabin. They circled the ocean for over 2 hours, burning fuel, running checklists, double-checking every system. They weren't flying blind, they were flying disciplined. The A380 was badly wounded, slats failed, brakes were limited, 2 engines stuck at near idle, weight well over the safe landing limit, and yet they brought it back. A perfect approach, a safe touchdown. And when the plane stopped on the runway, all 469 people were alive, not a single injury. So what saved Qantas Flight 32? It was training, experience, teamwork, and procedure. And above all, they didn't panic. That day, they added something more, cooperation. The cockpit worked as a unit. They didn't rush. They didn't let ego get in the way. They trusted their checklists, each other, and decades of practicing emergency procedures. This isn't just a story about planes, it's a story about what we do under pressure. In your life, the engine may blow. A medical diagnosis, a business crisis, a family emergency. The question is, do you panic or do you pause, assess, trust your training, and lean on your team? Qantas Flight 32 never made headlines for tragedy. It became a case study of what goes right when professionals train for the worst. Discipline under pressure saves lives. Train like it matters, because one day it will. So I want to talk about a story of a woman who went in for a routine procedure and nearly didn't wake up. But what saved her? Not luck, not adrenaline, but something every provider hopes they never have to use, and that's ACLS, which stands for Advanced Cardiac Life Support. So let's call her Lisa. And this is something that happened in our own clinic. She was 34 years old, a middle school teacher. She was scheduled for bilateral breast augmentation. She was nervous but healthy. Vitals were stable when she went into the operating room. The anesthesiologist prepped. Our team was ready. As I was about to make the first incision, and Lisa was stable until she wasn't. 12 minutes into the case, Lisa's heart rate suddenly dropped, then stopped, asystole, a flat line. In a flash, the operating room was transformed. And this is a moment you hope never comes, but you're trained to face. Everyone knew their role. I started chest compressions over the drapes. The circulating nurse grabbed the crash cart. The scrub tech controlled the field and called for help. The cold leader, a senior anesthesiologist, took command. This wasn't their first experience. It was about communication, roles, rehearsed chaos. With compressions, atropine, airway secured, every second counted. After just a couple of minutes of CPR, there it was. A rhythm, a pulse. Lisa's heart was beating in, but it wasn't just her life that had returned. It was a reminder that what saved her life wasn't a miracle. It was training, teamwork, and muscle memory. In those moments, no one looked at a textbook. No one asked, "What do we do now?" Because we already knew. ACLS transforms professionals into a team that saves lives. Lisa went home, no complications. She doesn't even remember it. But everyone in that OR does. They remember the adrenaline, they remember the silence, they remember when the monitor flatlined, and they remember what brought her back. ACLS. If you work in healthcare, you know the drills. You take the test, you run the scenarios over and over, and you hope that you never need to use it. But when you do, because one day it does happen. Train hard, stay calm, work the algorithm. ACLS saves lives because seconds don't wait. Sometimes the most dangerous decision isn't made at 30,000 feet or under surgical lights. It's made in your mind. When you tell yourself, we've come this far, we can't stop now. This is a story of two professionals, a pilot and a surgeon. Both ignored warning signs and paid the price. On April 4th, 1977, Southern Airways Flight 242 was en route from Huntsville to Atlanta. It was a twin-engine DC-9, and weather reports warned of intense thunderstorms along the route. But the captain, he decided to press on. As the plane entered the storm, the crew lost all visibility. Then hail. Huge hailstorms. Massive, blinding, damaging hail. Both engines flamed out. There's no power, no thrust, no way out. They became a glider. The crew attempted an emergency landing on a rural highway in Georgia. They hit trees, cars, and exploded on impact. 63 people died that day. Why? Because the captain refused to deviate, to wait it out, to divert. The weather wasn't the only storm that day. His inflexibility was just as fatal. Now let's talk about the operating room. A 34-year-old woman enters for a routine laparoscopic hysterectomy. She's healthy, fit. The case is scheduled for less than an hour. But just before induction, her vital signs begin to drift. A little bit of low blood pressure and mild fever. She complains of abdominal pain out of proportion. But the surgeon, he shakes his head, he proceeds. The patient becomes hypotensive mid-procedure. Then she becomes septic, then arrests. Despite full resuscitation, she dies in the recovery room. A postmortem reveals she had undiagnosed peritonitis from a ruptured appendix. A delay, even just a CT scan, could have saved her life. But the surgeon had made up his mind. No turning back, no flexibility. Two different professionals, two different settings, but the same mindset. We've planned this, we're behind schedule, let's get it finished. But flying into a storm or cutting into a patient without pause isn't courage, it's hubris. In psychology, it's called the sunk cost fallacy. The belief that we must finish something just because we've already started. But in high-stakes environments, that thinking kills. Pilots are trained to divert, surgeons are taught to reassess, yet under pressure, ego, fatigue, time constraints, and a fear of looking indecisive can override even the best training. And that's when things go wrong. The best pilots, they land short, they turn around, they apologize for delays and save lives. The best surgeons do the same thing. They call timeouts. They listen to their teams. They pause even when everything's set up and ready to go. Because flexibility isn't weakness. It's the mark of a professional who puts safety before pride. So next time you hear that voice in your head, we're almost there, ask yourself this: is the plan more important than the people? Because real strength isn't in sticking to the plan, it's in knowing when to change it. Flexibility is what separates good intentions from good outcomes. Whether you fly planes or hold a scalpel, be brave enough to pivot. In aviation and surgery, 5 seconds can mean the difference between life and death. So this is the story of two different teams, a flight crew and a surgical team, who shared one critical flaw. They rushed, and people died because of it. It was August 31st, 1988. Delta Flight 1141 prepares to take off from Dallas-Fort Worth, a short hop to Salt Lake City. A routine flight. The crew's behind schedule, however. They chat casually during taxi. The pre-takeoff checklist is incomplete. The warning horn that should have caught the error was disabled. The plane takes off. Seconds later, it stalls and crashes just beyond the runway. 14 people are killed. The NTSB concludes the crew was distracted. The checklist was rushed or skipped. The cockpit wasn't sterile at a time when it needed total focus. Now let's shift to St. George Hospital in Sydney, Australia. A woman is scheduled for routine uterine surgery, a dilation and curettage. She's 62, healthy. It should be simple, but during prep, an anesthetist noticed something strange. The patient is becoming hypotensive. Blood pressure is falling. A blood sample is sent, but the surgical team is eager to start. They're under time pressure. Another surgery is waiting. So they decide to proceed before getting the blood surgery sample back. Mid-surgery, the patient codes. The lab result comes back. It was a mismatched blood type, a catastrophic oversight. She suffered multi-organ failure and died days later. The coroner's report pointed to time pressure, incomplete checks, and rushing the process as key contributors to the fatal mistake. No timeout, no triple check, just a need to move fast. In the cockpit and the OR, there are steps for a reason. Checklists, protocols, safety nets. But when pressure builds, when we feel behind or under the gun, those steps start to feel optional. And that's when routine turns deadly, because both teams were rushed. Haste can give the illusion of control. It's in those moments, however, the high-frequency, routine tasks where we let our guard down, and where tiny slips become fatal errors. After Flight 1141, airline procedures were again rewritten. No more chit-chat during taxi, takeoff, or landing. Mandatory checklist compliance. Cockpit discipline became sacred. In hospitals, the WHO surgical safety checklist became standard. Surgical timeouts, blood compatibility verifications, team briefings before the first incision. In the rush to meet a schedule, don't lose the patient, don't lose the plane, because when time is tight, your focus has to be tighter. In aviation and in surgery, there's no such thing as just this once. The fastest way to a tragedy is to skip the pause that saves. Slow is smooth, smooth is safe. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you really did, please like and subscribe. And then we'll see you on the next video, which will be a travel video. Thank you.